Hi, everyone. John Liebman here. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com, the #1 site for learning bass online. We have a very special guest today, all the way from up north from Canada, Andy Curran. You may know his work from his solo work and all the stuff he did with Coney Hatch. And most recently, Envy of None, teaming up with Alex Lifeson. So great to meet you, Andy. Hello, and welcome to For Bass Players Only.
John, thank you for that nice intro, and never heard of Alex Lifeson. Don't even know who you're talking about. Who is
well,
that?
you should Google him on the interwebs thing that the kids are into.
I know. I pinch myself for going, what in what lifetime did this happen? But no, it's been fun.
We will definitely get to that in a minute. But first of all, Canada. I've always had a very soft spot for Canada because both my wife and my mother were born in Canada.
Nice.
And I grew up outside Detroit. Did you know Detroit is the only place in the United States where you actually have to travel south to get to Canada?
Oh, yeah, you're right. And recently your Ambassador Bridge was all clogged up by those angry truckers. But I love Detroit, man. I played, I think the last time I played there was at a really cool venue called Harpo's. I don't know if Harpo's is still around. Yeah.
Legendary on the east side.
Love that spot, man. Dangerous neighborhood, but good spot.
Yeah. Well, I want to lead up to all the stuff that you're talking about. I imagine you want to talk about new things, current things, and our audience wants to know. But I would like to go back to the beginning, and tell me about your musical upbringing and how you became a bass player. What attracted you to the low end?
Yeah, that's a pretty cool story, John, on how I gravitated towards the bass. I will tell you that my parents are both born and raised in London, just outside of London, in a suburb called Muswell Hill in the UK. Their parents were Irish, so Curran is a very common Irish name. If you look in the phone book, it's almost there's as many Currans as there is Smiths. But my grandpa Joe.
Phone book. What's a phone book?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, I'm dating myself.
Point taken.
Yeah, but my grandfather Joseph Curran was a professional musician, and when he moved to England, he was part of the BBC orchestra. Some of the earliest recordings on the BBC were done from Alexandra Palace with a live band, and my grandpa played trumpet. And he eventually moved to Canada and taught music here. And so I think music's kind of in my DNA. My dad was what I'd like to call a campfire guitarist. He had a acoustic guitar that he would strum outside, and we'd do sing songs, and he could tap his way up around piano. And my sisters, my older sisters and my brothers, they would consume music at a rapid rate. I was always surrounded by them listening to the Monkees and the Beatles and Dave Clark 5 and James Gang. And my older brother would get into Frank Zappa and all this kind of stuff. So I was always like, oh my God, like what are my brothers and sisters listening to, right?
Quite a spectrum of styles.
Yeah. But the bass guitar story and how I ended up being there, I'm going to confess, even though I know this is a group for bass players only, but I'm a closet guitar player. I always loved guitarists. I grew up listening to, Johnny Winter and Rick Derringer and Tommy Bolin and Joe Walsh, and the list goes on and on. Al Di Meola, like those, Jeff Beck was a big, huge inspiration for me. But and I'm talking about my early teens, but it wasn't until one of my birthdays that my sister's boyfriend came over and he handed me a guitar case because he knew I loved music so much. I popped it open. And I didn't appreciate it back then, but I still have it. And I made a promise to him. I popped it open. It was a Hofner Beetle bass. And he said, this is your present for your birthday. I know you love music, man. You should play an instrument. And he planted the seed in my head. And, he said, but we got to make a deal. You have to promise me you will never sell this instrument. So I have a 1967 Hofner Beetle bass that is original, that I've kept that promise to. John Stevenson was the guy's name. The funny part about the story was that, so I got the bass and immediately, never had any formal training. I wish I did. I did a couple bass lessons with a guy here in Toronto And he steered me on to bassists like Stanley Clarke and Jaco Pastorius, but actually encouraged me to listen to a lot of disco and R&B. And I, as a rocker, I was like, I'm not listening to disco. And he's like, no, go listen to the Bee Gees. Go listen to Sly and the Family Stone. Go listen to War. Go listen to those bass lines. You need to learn those. I know you're a knucklehead rocker, but go listen to those, right? So that's, and a lot of those early years was me sitting in my bedroom with the Hofner Beetle bass, which is kind of semi-acoustic hollow, so you don't really need an amp. And I would kind of whistle and find the note and then play it along, right? And so I kind of trained myself from ear. I can't read music. I can read tab, but I can't read music. But I know my neck and my intonation. Many years later, I can, I've got a good grasp of the fretboard. But the story about the Hofner Beetle bass that I want to tell you is many, many years later, I asked my sister, and and she was 19 or 20 at the time. I said, where did John get the bass from? Like, how did that whole thing come together, and why did I get it? She said, well, I never wanted to tell you because I didn't want mom and dad to know, but he was actually selling pot. He was an early drug dealer, and he went to collect his money, and the guy didn't have it. So he said, I'm taking that. And he picked up the Hofner Beetle bass and he walked out with it and he gave it to me. So I love that story, John, because it's very rock and roll. And I got a Repo Man Hofner Beetle bass that was a drug deal gone bad.
That's funny. Wow.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of stories about how people took up the bass. Usually it's because they wanted to play guitar and there were too many guitar players in the band. That was my story.
Too many strings.
You can play guitar and not be in the band, or you can play the bass and be in the band. So
I'll take it.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Wow. That is a great story. I really love your solo stuff, the Coney Hatch stuff. And you seem to be expanding now, going into a different direction with Envy of None. It's very different for you. How would you describe that band?
Yeah. Well, it was intentional, the directional change, or the opening up of the blinders, and just not going back to the old safe confines of writing 4 on the floor rock songs. I would describe Envy of None as maybe if Massive Attack had a car crash with Garbage and their uncles were 9 Inch Nails and Depeche Mode.
Oh boy. You've given this some thought.
Yeah, I think so, because there's, Alex Lifeson and I share a very common interest in movie soundtracks, and we talk about songwriters like Trevor Rabin or Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo, or even Danny Elfman. And we spoke about how liberating that would be to write music and compose it for film and television, because you don't have an evil record company guy or a manager or producer going, no, you have to write 2-minute songs and 4-minute songs. So that kind of opened our eyes up, and we started writing and collaborating together and soundscaping things. And it really offered up the freedom, John, to maybe try some different things stylistically, to bring out my fretless bass, which I had never recorded with, to use the Hofner, but also use a Rickenbacker 4003. And I had the pick of the litter. I've got quite a nice little guitar bass collection of about 20 to 22 instruments. So I would just go, I think I'm going to pull out my Dan Electro Longhorn bass for this one, So it was very liberating, and also not being put in the box and confined to just doing 4 on the floor rock. Where with Alex, obviously a lot more progressive, but for me, quite a nice ride to be able to scratch that itch.
Well, like I said, it's different. I mean, your longtime fans go back to I Can't Quit You and No Tattoos. Great songs, by the way.
Thank you.
A lot of the new album, I find, I'd call it understated, with kind of an 80s vibe and almost like Laurie Anderson-ish kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what was the message that you were trying to get out, or did you already answer that with your previous comments, or is there something else there?
No, I think, John, it's a very good question. I think in terms of stylistically, like The barometer or the bar that we set and during the pandemic, we were exchanging ideas back and forth. The four members of Envy and None, myself, Alex, Maya Wynn out in Portland, Oregon, and Alex Lifeson. We started exchanging ideas, and there was no set rules. It was like, here's 6 or 7 ideas that Andy's working on, and there's no rhyme or reason. Some of them were nasty and fuzzy, like the fuzz bass track Liar that has a lot of industrial bits on it, and then there was stuff that was really dreamy, like Old Strings, or a song like Dumb that had like that Euro new wave 80s vibe, and we just sent them out and went, do you like them? It would be like you and I being in a band, and I said, John, I've got 10 ideas. I'm going to send them to you. Pick your 4 favorite and let's start working on them. It wasn't until later on in the record where I emailed everybody and said, I think we could use one more that has a little bit of a bite to it, that's a little bit more up tempo. So I sent them Dog's Life, and I contacted Joe Vitale, the drummer that played with Joe Walsh forever, and he agreed to play drums on it. So that was maybe the only time I consciously said, we need a bit of a rocker up tempo on this. But the rest of the time, it was very organic and just like, do you like it? Great, let's start working on it.
Teaming up with Alex Lifeson must have been really a special thing.
Oh my God.
How did that come to be?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of a background, because at the root of all of this, John, and I always tell people that I'm a massive music fan. That's where it came from. I've always loved music, and I still consider myself, they use that term, the punter, the kid that buys the ticket and goes to the show. And I love still doing that and buying new music. But my first exposure to Rush, I went to see them at Massey Hall, a great venue here in Toronto, All the World's a Stage. And when they recorded that record at Massey Hall, I was there. So as a kid growing up in Canada, not only does our government have a programming in place where they support Canadian music and they have to play a certain amount of Canadian music, but being in Toronto, you are spoon-fed these bands, and Rush played, Massey Hall and Maple Leaf Gardens every New Year's. So I grew up watching Rush, and probably bought a Rickenbacker for that very reason, that I loved Geddy Lee, but I had to have one. But many years later, my band Coney Hatch gets signed to the same label, Anthem Records. So now they're label mates, and we have the same manager. So I ended up meeting the guys and striking up a friendship over golf and tennis. Geddy and Alex played golf and tennis. Neil's a big hockey fan, so we used to talk a lot about hockey. And then by the time my solo record came out that you mentioned, No Tattoos, I got invited to open for Rush on the Roll the Bones tour. So it went to the next level, and I'm like, oh my God, here I am, the 16-year-old kid that watched them at Massey Hall. And then I spent 12 years working with their management company and their A&R guy at their label, where I got even closer with the guys. So John, I'm constantly pinching myself going, how did this happen? How did I end up in this amazing place? And then the icing on the cake, composing with Alex Lifeson and working with him on a creative level, it was just like, I still pinch myself going, in what world does this happen?
Yes. Let's go back to your gear. You mentioned the Hofner Beetle bass. You mentioned Rickenbacker. You mentioned Dan Electro, Longhorn. And I think you said you had 20, 22 basses, something like that. But whenever somebody tells me a number like that, I always say, yeah, but I bet you have 1 or 2 that you gravitate to more than the others.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm a gear nut, John, so thank you for giving me the forum to brag a little bit about these basses and guitars that I have, because the majority of them are basses. I think I have maybe 6 or 7 guitars as well, because I'm a closet guitar player, as I mentioned to you, and I like to compose on both bass and guitar. But certainly the Hofner is one of the oldest ones I have. I recently, just because I loved how damn cool they look, I bought a 1969 Dan Armstrong acrylic bass that, people might have seen Ronnie Wood and Bill Wyman use them in the Stones. very distinctive sounding bass, super heavy, but look really cool because it's that see-through acrylic, right?
Right.
And I believe Ampeg might have been responsible for manufacturing those. I've got a 69, a very old 69 version of that. When Coney Hatch first started, I loved BC Rich, and they were, and I got my hands on a couple Mockingbirds. So when we were on tour with Judas Priest, I had a long scale Mockingbird and a short scale. I subsequently sold the long scale, but I kept the short scale, and that's the bass I use on Lyre, which is, it actually has an overdrive in the actual bass, a little toggle switch with a distortion knob in there. And my God, you can blow up some amps pretty good with that
the
thing.
BC Rich you're talking about?
Yeah, the BC Rich has an actual distortion gain toggle switch and a volume knob just for, for extra. But then I really started to gravitate towards Fenders. So I've got, I don't know if I think I might have mentioned this to you that I played fretless. So I've got a Jaco Pastorius relict fretless jazz bass that Geddy Lee gave me as a gift, is one of my favorites. I love to practice with that, John, just for my intonation on my right hand specifically. But I think I've got in total maybe 3 or 4 precision basses that became my go-to live basses, just because I loved that combination of plugging a P bass into an Ampeg SVT head, 300 watt head with an 810
I thought you were going to say B15. I should have known better. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. SVT, man. Loud and proud, buddy. At one time I had 2 cabs and 2 heads. I've narrowed it down to 1 now. But I've got a 73 P bass. I've got a couple what I would call Franken basses that I work with the guys at Fender. I've got a Fender Precision body with a jazz neck that's pretty cool, that I put a bunch of Chicago Blackhawks stuff all over it, right? My favorite hockey team. I have an 8-string that I used on a song called Old Strings. And that was made custom for me by Lado Guitars here in Canada.
Okay, but that's like a 4-string that's double strung, I assume.
Yeah, so it has piccolo bass strings sitting underneath, kind of like if you imagine a 12-string guitar concept. Yeah. So you've got your regular bass strings, but you've got piccolo, much thinner gauge underneath them, very chimey. And the 8-string purchase led me to a 12-string purchase, which I bought a 12-string Hamer, like Tom Peterson, a Cheap Trick. And every time I bring that one out, John, the guitar players just go, "Oh my God!" It's like, "What's he?" Because it eats up all of those frequencies, right?
Is it green like Tom's?
No, mine is black and it's a short scale. It's an old Hamer 12-string. And I'm just trying to think if I've left out any other candidates. Well, I mentioned to you the Longhorn. When I was listening to Golden Earring, I used to look at all the pictures and see that their bassists used a Longhorn. The old ones are quite expensive. They're $6,000-$7,000 to find one. So I have a new reissue, but it sounds really good. It's got the lipstick pickup on it. And I use that bass on Shadow. So they were like little paintbrushes. My wife says to me, like, "Why do you have so many?" And I said, each of them have their own distinct tone. And I usually think ahead of time, like, what would be a good bass for this? And, the one thing which I'm sure a bunch of bassists listening to this will be like, "What did you do, Curran? You didn't do that." And I would put the bass down and play bass keyboards. I've got a lot of Moog settings with some old Moog Saurus or some Taurus pedals. And I think, John, that's what gives some of the music, it's maybe sort of like that Depeche Mode 80s and 90s new wave vibe to it, because I was a big fan of Patrick O'Hearn when he played in Missing Persons. He's the bass player for Frank Zappa. And I went to see Missing Persons, and I was amazed to see that Patrick was playing keyboard bass on some stuff. So I went out and bought one and doubled a lot of my bass with that big analog fat keyboard sound. So about 4 or 5 songs where there is no electric bass on any of it. It's all just bass keyboards. So, that, and I have to give a big shout out to Tech 21, because my favorite pedal is the Doug Pinnick pedal from King's X. And I'm a huge fan of King's X. But when I got that pedal, my Ampeg SVT was on steroids when I plugged that thing in. It was like, okay, here we come. So the Sans Amp Doug Pinnick pedal, I can't live without it now. I absolutely fell in love with it, and I use that on every single song on the Envy of None record where I play electric bass.
Even though Tech 21 also has a Geddy Lee pedal, you still
I
prefer
know,
the
I
Doug
know.
pedal?
I haven't really told Getty that. He doesn't know I'm not using his. I'm using Doug's. You know.
I want to ask you about playing bass and learning bass. For Bass Players Only is a bass instruction site, and we've got people coming from all over the world learning how to play bass. Every day, more and more people are coming. Most of the people that I attract are men in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They're not career bound. They're not trying to set the world on fire. They've always wanted to do this. Maybe now they have some time. They want to play some classic rock from the 60s and 70s. They want to play some soul, maybe a little R&B. In that context, what advice do you have for somebody who wants to learn bass? What do you think is important for them to know?
Okay, that's a really good question, and I want to tell you, John, that there was a period, I would say for about 6 months, where I did take some lessons because I really wanted to jump the line fast. And there was a great bassist here in Toronto by the name of Scott McLeod, and he played in a Zeppelin cover band. And he's the guy that was telling me, you know, Curran, you got to listen to some disco. Don't just be one dimensional. Think about the bass and some of these bass lines that are happening in R&B. You should learn them, and it'll help you articulate different ideas, right? So my first set of advice is, don't be stingy on the type of music that you listen to. Open your ears. You know, I remember reading articles about what Carol Kay, her bass line that she played on Good Vibrations with the Beach Boys, and I went down this rabbit hole on YouTube to see what she was actually playing, and it's quite a complicated line. But when you're listening to that song as a fan, you're just like, this is such an awesome song. But then when you dissect it and hear that bass line, so not a huge Beach Boys fan, but boy, was I impressed, listening to what Carol did. And so stretch your mind and listen to a lot of different types of bassists wherever you can find it, because there's beautiful bass lines everywhere. I was encouraged very early on that the bass player's job is to be best friends with the drummer. You got to be locked in with the drummer. And I've always felt that my job as a bassist was to be the engine of the band with the drummer and to be locked in with them. So I started off very early with a metronome, and I would practice chromatic lines with a metronome beside me, because you can do all the finger exercises you want and you can build your dexterity there. But if you do it with something that's keeping time for you, it's going to help you when you get in a band later, because you're going to be that much more in tune with the drummer and what he's doing, or he or she. And maybe my last bit of advice is, Billy Sheehan is a friend of mine, and he's a virtuoso, but I thought
of him when you said BC Rich. Didn't he used to be with them 100 years ago?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah, the pointy rock sticks of death, right? Those basses. But, I think about a bassist's job, and it really is all about rhythm, for me anyway, to hold that down, to serve the song, and maybe not to be so much like, look what I can play. Look at me, because obviously when you think about Geddy Lee or Chris Squire or Stanley Clarke or Jaco Pastorius or Billy Sheehan, these are guys that have taken the bass to the next level. And when you're starting out, that's fine. That if you have aspirations to get there and play like Billy or Chris Squire, no problem. But start with the fundamentals. Start with being locked in and part of the rhythm section and doing your job. And I can't stress how important it is to have a drum machine and play along to it, and change the tempo. Play really slow, play really quick. It'll help your dexterity, but the drummer is your best friend. Keep that in mind. That's my biggest advice.
I agree. I've gotten into some impassioned conversations with Jeff Berlin about using a metronome or not using. Well, he was the one that was so passionate.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, he's so against it. He says, no, don't do it, and it's going to mess up your time, and you don't need it. And that's a whole other. I always say a metronome will keep you honest.
Agreed. And there's nothing worse to. The drummer is supposed to be the driving force. You don't want to be playing in front of the drummer. You don't want to be pushing the groove. I got into production a lot of times, when I would say to young bassists, less is more. You don't have to play all kinds of notes. Sometimes when you're not playing is when you're speaking and leaving holes in your bass lines. But don't be pushing in front of the drummer. The drummer's job is to lead the charge, and you're going to follow him. So even playing on the backbeat, I always loved, just being slightly behind. All those R&B players, John, they're so good at that.
What would you be if you were not a bass player? You can't say a guitar player. I mean, something outside of music.
Well, how about this? Can I answer it and tell you what I wanted to be?
Well, yeah.
Because every kid in Canada, kind of like in the States, baseball is synonymous with you guys, right? But hockey is in our DNA. And I had visions of being an NHL hockey player. I played since I was 5. I still play 3 times a week. And what happened was, John, all my peers started getting bigger and faster and meaner than me. And I'm just a skinny rake of a guy. And I realized I'm not going to make the NHL. My passion was to be a professional hockey player. But I think that was my goal, but then I took a slight turn and went into music and rock and roll. So it's a crazy kid's dream, but I love tennis too. My wife said, if you retire tomorrow, Andy, what would you do? I'd probably get my teaching certificate and teach kids how to play tennis. So sports and music are big with me.
Good answer. Envy of None is the name of the band, and it is also the name of the album, and that is scheduled to be released on April 8th. Yeah, that's my father's going to turn 96 on that day.
Oh, awesome. Congratulations, buddy.
Maybe I'll get him a copy for his birthday.
Yeah, chill him out a little bit. Put the headphones on, let him take the ride.
Well, it's so great catching up with you. It's so great getting to know you, and that the Canada connection, as I mentioned, is very close to my heart.
Yes.
So congratulations on the band and the record and everything else. I hope it does real well for you. And I've heard it, so I think it is going to do very well. So let's get together again and have a follow-up interview, because I know you're going to be doing something very cool, and we'd like to find out what it is and share it with our audience.
I'd love to, John, and thanks for letting me geek out and talk about bass guitars. I don't usually get the platform to do that. So when Chip said that this was happening, I got really excited, hoping that you would ask all those questions that you did. So I appreciate it, buddy.
Hey, for bass players only, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Everybody else leave the room.
Thanks again. Thank you so much to our special guest, Andy Curran. Again, the album and the band, Envy of None, April 8th. Check it out. I'm John Liebman. You're watching the #1 site for learning bass online. It's not for everyone. It's ForBassPlayersOnly.com. See you next week.